This is Scotty Reed with a Black Talk Radio News Report. And on this segment, we will be speaking with a legend of Black radio once again, Mr. Paul Porter. We will be speaking about his newly released book titled Blackout, My 40 Years in the Music Business. Welcome back to BTR News, Paul.
Hey, man, always good, Scotty, man. First of all, you always on time, and you always receptive, man. That's hard to do these days.
Well, it's just part of, our mission, which is actually seems to be your mission with your radio station, and that is to bring relevant and important information to our community, which is sorely lacking, which we'll talk a little bit about that during this interview.
All right, for sure.
Now, Paul, your book is getting great reviews from the general public, and one of my favorite artists in the music industry, Chuck D of Public Enemy, a group whose music played a role in my social political development, and the track Burn, Hollywood Burn was my first lesson on the power of media and the role it plays in promoting racism. Chuck, in endorsing Blackout, says, Paul Porter is a guru, visionary, and has led a Forrest Gump, James Bond life in the black back hidden world of technologies, culture, and communications. Follow his timeline in Blackout, and it will explain truly why things are the way they are. Pay attention. Now, you can obtain a copy of Blackout online at www.blackoutthebook.com. I guess my first couple of questions would be, Paul, when did you first conceptualize Blackout the book? How long did it take to write, and what do you hope to achieve with it?
Well, to be honest, I had a book deal with HarperCollins about 9 years ago. I wrote this book about payola, corruption in the music industry, and at the time, HarperCollins was part of, it still is part of Sony and RCA and BMG and all these other companies. So when the book got completed, they were worried about some of the stories I told were with their record labels. So the guy who signed the book, his boss said they couldn't put it out. And I was just in shock, so they let me keep my advance, but I couldn't put out a book for 7 years. So I sat on it and decided to do it, a little differently and put it out myself this time. So it's been coming for a long time, trust me. But I decided to self-publish because I wanted to tell real stories in it.
In hindsight, are you surprised that it turned out that way?
Back then, no, they were aggressive in the bidding and all that. And, I was quite obvious of what stories I was going to tell. So, back then I thought it'd be cool, but little did I know that HarperCollins was, owned by somebody else and somebody else. And, all these corporations have merged. It is like one big company that mutes information to everybody. So I wasn't surprised, but I was disappointed.
So in actuality, they paid you not to tell those stories.
Yeah, basically. But I mean, trust me, I would have loved to tell the stories for nothing instead of, sitting on my hands for years. But everything works out in time. And this book is a lot better than the book I gave them. I talk about culture. I talk about, just the changes, man, over the years, how music played such a powerful role in my life. And I know it can't play the same role in the younger generation's life because they don't get the same content that, folks in their 40s and 50s and 60s got 30 years ago, that's for sure.
I have to say, Paul, that before I got into some of the chapters of the book, the intro by itself was very informative in discussing Miss Karen Klein. For those not in the music industry, will you tell us a little bit about Miss Klein and if she is still active in the music business today?
Now, look, Karen Klein back in the day was the account your FedEx envelope came in the mail on Saturday. Programmers all over the country. And yes, it's still prevalent because America is a capitalist country, but it just happens in different ways. Before, you would get envelopes stuffed with cash. Now everybody has LLCs, and they get direct deposits. Some people still get cash, but yeah, it's a still pay-for-play world, and that's why music's so controlled and so, we used to have regional music. Records would break out in the South or the Northeast or the West or, Texas, but that doesn't happen anymore. Now, it happens the same time, same place all over the country, and that's because of pay-for-play.
And you just answered in part my next question, which was going to be if payola or some form of it is still in practice, which you just said it was. You think so, considering the makeup of most radio station playlists, just for a lay person like me, that's evident. So how hard is it for new artists to break into the business to get airplay? And are there ways for new artists to overcome a rigged industry?
Slim to none, bro. I mean, it happens every blue moon, but everybody, folks talk about Chance the Rapper is independent. Well, Chance the Rapper had a lot of money behind him to get started. And I mean, it takes tens of thousands of dollars just to get started commercially. And it takes a whole lot more in terms of marketing and stroking the right hands to make a record happen nationally. You can sometimes break out regionally, but they stop you on different levels all the time. The system's not made for the little man anymore. It's made for corporate America, and there's that marriage between record companies and broadcast facilities that is, something terrible. And it's happening now on Spotify and Pandora, and the list streaming is the new thing, but they found a way to buy those spins and playlists also.
Now, I have interviewed hip-hop artists in the past. I actually used to work with in producing a talk radio program for Cleo Jones, who was a protege of Chuck D. And she told the story about once she got a deal, how they tried to change her image, how they even tried to change her music. And would you say that that still goes on today for those who are fortunate enough to?
Of course. I mean, they control your content, your producers. It's very rare that an artist starts out one way and stays that way because the dollar makes you change. And they see things in people, but they also want to add things and subtract things all the time. That's why lawyers are the most important. And that's why the messages are all the same. It's a factory, and it's, I talk about it in detail, and the shame about it is I've got to work with artists, producers, publishing, programming, television, radio, publicity. So Blackout the Book, I tackle it from a different side. A lot of time, artists don't even know what's really going on. They just know their dealings with the record company. They don't know how their records get placed and, publishing and a lot of the things. And luckily, over the course of time, I started when I was little. I used to spend weekends at Nina Simone's house. And my best friend's father remarried Nina Simone and was her manager. And I didn't know who Nina Simone was. I knew she was a star, and I knew she had the big house and all that stuff. But I started learning and being the student in the game over 40 years ago. And the book talks about it on different levels from way back then all the way up until January and Drake.
And Paul, we have a mutual friend in Kwabena Rasuli from the Chicago, Gary, Indiana area. And he runs Clear the Airways Project, whose mission is to clear the radio airways of what he calls killer radio. The very first chapter of the book, Blackout, discusses an encounter you had years ago with a young student who confronted you with a question that you say in the book you had a hard time answering. Can you tell our listeners what this young lady asked you and why it had such an impact on you?
Well, during the time, man, I was in New York at Kiss and Hot 97, and the music was just changing in the 90s. It was just harder. We did less edits, and there was a record by Raw Digger, and the chorus was "Gotta beat that bitch with a bat." And the young lady you're talking about, she was in the 8th grade, and she came up to me with a note, and the note read, "Mr. Paul, can you get this record off the radio?" And it was the record that, I kept hearing that I had a problem with, and her mom got beat up by the father with a baseball bat, and that was the chorus, "Gotta beat that bitch with a bat." And it was like I had an epiphany, man. It was just like my radar went off when a young girl's crying to you, and, I tried everything I could. I reached out to the owner of Emmis Broadcasting. He still owns it, Jeff Smolian, by email. He didn't know me from Adam. But I was shocked. He responded within 10 minutes. The records came off the radio for about a week. My vice president and general manager, a guy named Barry Mayo, called me into the office, and I never worked again in commercial radio after that. I was blackballed. I went on television, talked about it, and they went on television the day after me on Hannity and Combs and said I was trying to rip them off for money, which was false. And I've been battling ever since the late 90s.
Wow. Now, considering how much violence in music is on corporate radio today, I imagine there may be a lot more young people out there who perhaps grapple with domestic and community violence situations, who may be similarly troubled by what they are hearing. Do you have a recommendation, not just for those students, but for activists like Kwabena Rasuli, any kind of suggestions to...
Well, here's my experience. Okay. Corporate radio's not going to change. They're not going to change if you protest and you stand out in front of them. What I did was said, after years of being on that side of it, I decided to get my own, and I got my station in Orlando, The Wire 98.5 FM. It's a low power FM, and I try to control the messages and the content on my radio station. I'm still active in trying to fight, but they're not changing until people change. And they just have that commercial power where, they can influence your kids. But most of all, I want parents to read the book to understand what is going on. And that's where we're lost at. Parents play their own urban adult contemporary music and listen to Tom Joyner and Michael Baisden, and their kids listening to, something completely different. So I think we got to do a better education with parents so we can have these sit-downs and conversations about content. And that's what I think we need to do a lot more than trying to battle the corporate radio.
If we can, I would like to jump to the 5th chapter titled Being Pimped. And in it, you recall working for Kathy Hughes, who has turned an AM radio station she got as part of a divorce settlement and parlayed it into one of the largest Black radio conglomerates in the industry. Now, certainly, she's viewed as a successful Black businesswoman, but oftentimes we know there is a personal cost involved in becoming successful in business, but in the chapter Being Pimped, it seems the personal cost on her way to being successful, at least in the early day, came at the expense of her employees. Now, I bring this up because we hear a lot about supporting Black businesses in the community, but yet the question of ethics seems to rarely come up. And so what was that experience like, Paul, and does that experience inform how you run your own station, The Wire 98.5 in Orlando?
Oh, yeah. Well, look, first of all, I thank Kathy Hughes for giving me the experience. You know, her motivation, and I remember when she just had WOL, she was really active in the community, going against the Washington Post and a lot of organizations. But it seems like every time that folks start to make money, they sort of selectively, I call it selective amnesia, forget about the people that brought them there. And financially, she forgot about everybody at Radio One, or now it's Urban One. And yeah, she pays some people, but it's surprising, man. I was with her in 1988. She's still paying part-timers the same $10 an hour rate that she was, you know, over almost 30 years ago. So that sort of shows you what the mindset is of ownership. And corporately, it happens in every way of life that, you know, the normal employee is getting undervalued. And I'm not going to do that with my station, but you know, it's a damn shame. It is.
Speaking of the Wire 98.5, which you mentioned is your LP-FM station in Community Pines Hills, a subdivision of Orlando, but it has been nicknamed, you say, Crime Hills. Now, in Chapter 11 of your book, Blackout, Music, Media, and Modern Youth Culture, you discuss some of the issues impacting that area and the state of media and the type of culture that exists there. Can you briefly discuss a few of those issues and how you and your team over at the Wire 98.5 are attempting to impact the community to help combat some of the issues? Because after all, Malcolm X told us that media is the most powerful entity on the planet, and its negative impact has certainly been felt.
Yeah, well, Pine Hills is in Orlando, and it's notoriously named Pine Kills, or Crime Kills, or Crime Hills. And, you know, from the first 60 days that we launched the station in late October, we had 13 homicides within a 3-mile radius of the station. So, I mean, the call from candlelight vigils to, we got a mentorship program with the local high school where we've got some great students from Evans High School, which is right up the street in Pine Hills from us, less than a mile away, that we're mentoring and teaching to be broadcasters. And we're, you know, we do a lot of stuff locally and give a voice to the voice that, you know, isn't heard. You know, I could try to book the Roland Martins of the world, but you know, it's better for me to have the commissioner, Regina Hill, that's local, on the radio, or state attorney, Ayala. She did the first interview with us after Governor Rick Scott took away her power in the murder cases that she didn't want to prosecute. So it's been great doing local radio and doing local issues and trying to touch the community and serve where you're licensed to. And that's what's been lost with syndication and black radio. You know, they pump in voices from all over the country, but they rarely serve the communities. And that's what black radio was, our one voice that we could trust. And that trust has been lost over the last 2 decades for sure.
You know, in my study of black radio, particularly during the period of the civil rights movement and the Black Power era, a lot of people don't realize how significant role that local radio played in organizing around not only just national issues, but there locally. So it's good to hear that you are giving voice to local communities, and you have, local voices in the community. But, you know, the problem you did touch upon of syndication is not so much, in my opinion, that we're getting all these different voices from all over the country, but that we're only hearing a few voices being syndicated to all.
Yeah, that's it. We're hearing the same Steve Harvey and Tom Joyner everywhere, and they don't touch on local issues. They don't touch on local elections. local police, what's going on. So that's what's lost, you know. And they have relationships with some of the biggest companies, because that's when you get big, they buy big, you know. So, you know, if I try to go on Steve Harvey and talk about BET, he says no because he has a show on BET. And same thing with, you know, Tom Joyner or Michael Baisden. They're limited. They're limited because their dollars are pumped in by these corporations all the time.
Speaking of Michael Baisden, I've actually had some personal outreach to him. I emailed his producers when the Gina 6 protests were going down, those young men in Louisiana. Okay. And I did some outreach, and to my surprise, he actually talked about it. And then another activist I know who was working on the Scott sisters situation, she reached out. Nancy Lockhart reached out to him. He had her on the show. But it seems, though, that he got dropped by a whole lot of stations after that.
Yeah, he sure did. You know, but I think why he got dropped, he was trying to make the money, and they didn't want to pay him the money. They gave him a nice deal, but he thought he could do more, and now he's trying to build up his, you know, stations once again. They will silence you once you get too big, or they let you grow like, you know, Sharpton did on MSNBC for a while, and they took that away and turned it into a Sunday show. So, you know, I mean, it happens all the time, and that's why I think we got to control our media and try to, you know, listen to the real voices out there that are going to speak truth to power, and that's rare.
Let's talk solutions, Paul, and certainly you are involved in implementing a solution in the Pine Hills community. Low power FM is certainly a way that I think that we should go, but also what my organization, Black Talk Media Project, is involved in is trying to teach people how to harness digital internet radio. Do you have it? Would you like to talk a little bit about that, or you know, just give us some suggestions on how we can take back the radio?
I think we can do it by, well, here's the problem. Low power FMs, they're not even going to have another window as the administration change. The FCC is not even going to open that up again. I don't know how long it's going to be, but, you know, I think digital radio and internet is the only viable choice for a while, because people aren't going to get radio stations. That this new administration is going to make sure that stops. So, you know, I think there is a power. It's just trying to get everybody to listen to the internet is also tough, because some people don't take the time to do the research, or, you know, the same thing. I know you wish you had more advertising dollars to grow your base, and that's the problem. We don't, you know, contribute to media projects enough, and I think that's the only way that we're going to control some of these images and take control of the culture again, is through media. Because I'm tired of hearing, you know, people talk about the Kardashians, or there's so much foolishness on urban radio today with so many real issues and problems. We got a lot of work to do.
I agree. Paul, do you have any final comments for our listeners? And is there a book tour? And tell us again how to Blackout.
Okay. Well, the first thing, I think Blackout is, you know, I got rave reviews. I've gotten a lot of press, and the responses. There's a Facebook page, Blackout the Book, where you can check out more. If folks want to order the book, I always tell them to go to my website. I sign every book, blackoutthebook.com. But I just think that we got to take a serious look at who's controlling the culture, and that's what I tried to do around music culture and entertainment to try to give folks, a guideline of what's happened, where we're at, and where we can go in this book. And that's why I'm sort of proud of it. And anybody can reach me on Twitter, Instagram, at Porter on Air on Twitter and IG. And once again, blackoutthebook.com.
Thank you for joining us on BTR News once again, and we hope to have you back, Mr. Paul Porter.
All right. Thank you, man. Appreciate it, Scotty.